You shouldn't be here, Alan. My wife's voice cut through the half-lit room, trembling but sharp enough to slice through my chest. The irony was, I hadn't walked in just now. I had been there all along, standing in the shadows of our own bedroom, half hidden behind the wardrobe door, listening. The smell of her perfume, jasmine, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary, was still hanging heavy in the air. But it wasn't just her scent. There was another one, musky, unfamiliar, the bitter trace of cologne that didn't belong to me. My fists clenched, the sound of my heartbeat roaring louder than the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. And then I heard it, his voice, low, confident, almost mocking. Relax, Margaret. He's too naive to notice. He trusts you blindly. I froze. My stomach twisted as if the floor had just given way beneath me. That voice belonged to none other than my own brother. The man I'd once defended at every family dinner. The man I'd bailed out of debt, who had sworn he'd owe me for life. Now he was sitting on the edge of my bed. Our bed, sharing whispered promises with the woman who'd worn my ring for 25 years. From where I stood, I could see their outlines in the reflection of the mirror on the dresser, his hand brushing against hers, her laugh soft, fake, the kind she used when she wanted something. Alan would give you the world if you asked, my brother murmured. I don't want his world, she replied coldly. I want mine. And with you, I'll have it. The words hit harder than any punch. My knees buckled slightly. But I didn't move. I didn't reveal myself. Not yet. Instead, I let their betrayal pour over me like boiling water, searing my skin, branding my soul. I thought of the sacrifices I'd made, working 16-hour shifts at the construction sites, so Margaret could live in comfort, so my brother could have a roof over his head when he had nowhere else to go. The leather armchair downstairs, my father's chair, I had given it to him when he lost his apartment. The savings I had burned through to pay for Margaret's dream kitchen. Every brick of this house carried my sweat, my scars, my years of blind devotion. And here they were, plotting against me under my own roof, in the very room where Margaret once promised me forever. I pressed my palm against the wardrobe door, its wood cold and steady against my shaking hand. My reflection in the sliver of mirror looked almost unrecognizable. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw, the shadow of a man who had been used. They thought I was weak. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I wasn't there. But I was. And from that night on, nothing would ever be the same. I didn't leave the room right away. I stayed there, hidden, while their words carved themselves into me like blades. Every syllable was a reminder that I had been building a life for two people who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. When I finally stepped out of the shadows later that night, after they had both gone, the bedroom felt like a crime scene. Margaret's silk scarf lay twisted on the floor, a silent witness. My brother's watch, cheap stainless steel, scratched at the edges, sat abandoned on the nightstand beside my wedding picture. The contrast was almost unbearable. One frame held the promise of a future, the other reeked of betrayal. I picked up the photo. Margaret was smiling, radiant in her ivory dress, eyes sparkling with something I once believed was love. My hand shook as I traced the glass surface, feeling the cold edges bite into my fingertips. My reflection stared back at me from that frame, older now, worn down, with eyes that had lost their shine. The house itself seemed to react to the truth I had just learned. The ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs felt louder, more accusing, each tick a reminder of years I couldn't get back. The air carried the faint smell of dust and jasmine perfume, clashing with the bitter stench of cologne that still lingered in the room. I walked through the hallway slowly, my hand grazing the wallpaper Margaret had chosen years ago. She had insisted on something floral, delicate. I remembered the argument. We couldn't really afford it, but she wanted it. A home should feel alive, she'd said, and I gave in, just like I always did. That had been my pattern for decades. Every paycheck I earned at the construction company, every side job I took on evenings and weekends, had been for them for her. I built this house with my own hands. I still remembered carrying wood planks in the biting winter air, my hands numb while Margaret sipped hot chocolate inside, supervising through the window. I told myself it was worth it, that one day she would look at me with pride, not expectation. And my brother, God, my brother. He had been a wreck when I found him, drowning in debt, no place to go, begging me for a second chance. I gave him one. I gave him my couch, my food, my money, my name to co-sign his loans. And every time, I believed him when he said, Alan, I'll pay you back. But the only thing he ever paid me back with was betrayal. In the living room, I sat in my father's leather armchair, the one piece of furniture I had sworn never to part with. The leather was cracked from age, worn smooth by years of use. When I was a boy, I'd sit on his lap in that very chair while he told me, "Family is everything, Alan. Blood always comes first." But blood had cut me deeper than any stranger ever could. The quiet of the house pressed in on me. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the wind against the windows, the creak of the old floorboards, as if the house itself was restless with the weight of my discovery. I thought of the nights I'd stayed late at work, climbing scaffolding in the freezing cold, just so Margaret could have the life she wanted. I thought of every family holiday I hosted, every gift I bought, every bill I paid for my brother when he had nothing. And I thought of the empty chair at the dinner table tonight, the seat where trust should have been. My chest ached with something heavier than anger. It was grief. Grief for a life I thought I had, for a marriage I thought was real, for a brother I thought I could trust. But grief has a strange way of hardening into something else. As I sat there, staring at the flickering glow of the lamp, I felt it transforming into resolve. They thought I was blind. They thought I would never see the truth. But I had. And now, with every detail etched into my memory, I was beginning to see the outline of something else. A plan. Because betrayal cuts deep. But revenge, when done right, leaves scars that never heal. The breaking point came 3 nights later. I had been moving through the days like a ghost, silent, invisible, pretending everything was normal, while inside my chest, something boiled, waiting to erupt. Margaret still kissed me on the cheek every morning, as if her lips hadn't just touched my brother hours before. My brother still smiled at me when he came by, slapping my shoulder with that fake familiarity, as if he hadn't been sitting on the edge of my bed whispering lies into my wife's ear. But the mask finally cracked when I found Margaret's phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a message she forgot to hide. "I can't wait until it's just us. He won't even see it coming." It was from my brother. The words glared at me from the screen like fire. I read them again and again until my pulse roared in my ears. My hand tightened around the phone, and for a brief second I almost smashed it against the tile. But I didn't. Instead, I placed it back exactly where she had left it, screen down, as if I hadn't seen a thing. Because now I knew. I didn't just suspect, I knew. They weren't only betraying me, they were planning something bigger, something final. That night, I sat in my father's armchair again, the leather creaking under my weight, and pulled open the drawer of the small table beside it. Inside lay the pocket watch he had given me on his deathbed. The chain was tarnished, the cover scratched, but when I flipped it open, it still ticked steadily, a symbol of time, of patience, of legacy. I held it in my palm, the faint ticking grounding me as I realized the truth. The man I had been, the forgiving brother, the devoted husband, the blind provider, was gone. The man holding that watch was someone new, someone who would not beg, who would not cry, who would not crumble under betrayal. I remembered my father's words, spoken long ago. "Son, trust is given freely, but once it's broken, it's a weapon. Wield it wisely." And that's when it clicked. Their greatest weapon had been my trust, but now I would turn it against them. The plan didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly, like blueprints laid across a table. Every memory of sacrifice became a brick in my resolve. Every smile they faked, every lie they told, became fuel, and the more I thought about it, the more clarity I found. By the time Margaret walked through the front door that night, carrying grocery bags she probably bought with my money, I had already made the silent vow. I would let them continue believing I was blind. I would let them play their little game, whisper in the dark, pass notes and promises. Because while they plotted against me, I would be plotting something far greater. Not just to expose them, not just to end what they had started, but to make sure they would never ever forget that I had been in the room the night they thought I wasn't. For the first time in years, I couldn't sleep in my own bed. The mattress felt contaminated, as though every lie Margaret had whispered to my brother had seeped into the sheets. I ended up on the couch, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the house settling. The silence was supposed to be comforting, but it only reminded me of how hollow everything had become. I wondered, what if I just walked away? The thought hit me like a whisper in the dark. I could sell the house, disappear into another city, maybe another country, leave them both to rot in the ruins of the life they'd destroyed. I was tired. God, I was so tired. Of working, of forgiving, of believing in people who didn't believe in me. A part of me longed for peace, for the kind of quiet that didn't ache. I pictured myself somewhere warm, maybe by the ocean. A small house, no one to lie to me, no one to betray me, just me, the sound of waves, and a chance to start over. But then, I thought of the chair. That old leather armchair where my father had once sat, his rough hand gripping mine as he told me what family meant. I thought of the pocket watch, its steady ticking reminding me that time wasn't infinite. I thought of every holiday meal where I footed the bill, every debt I had forgiven, every night I came home too exhausted to eat, but still found the energy to make sure they were comfortable. And then I thought of my brother's smirk, Margaret's laugh, the message on her phone. The ache in my chest turned into something sharper, something alive. Walking away would mean handing them victory. It would mean every sacrifice, every scar on my hands, every sleepless night had been for nothing. No. If I left, they'd continue their lives untouched, building their future on the ashes of my loyalty. They'd raise a glass to each other, toast to their cleverness, and tell themselves I had been too blind to notice, too weak to act. But I wasn't blind, and I wasn't weak. I stood up from the couch, my bare feet pressing into the cold wooden floor. I walked to the mantel where our family photos were lined up in neat rows. One by one, I studied them. Our wedding day, our vacations, the Christmas mornings, smiles that now looked like masks, memories that suddenly felt counterfeit. A strange calm settled over me. The doubt that had been gnawing at me just minutes before began to fade, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to stay. And I was going to make sure they remembered every lie, every betrayal, every laugh at my expense. Because vengeance wasn't just an option anymore. It was the only way forward. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of betrayal never even crossed your mind? That was me. For years I believed loyalty was unbreakable, that family and love meant safety. But the truth I uncovered shattered that illusion forever. And here's the thing. Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it changes you. It sharpens you. It turns silence into strategy, pain into power. If you've ever felt that sting, the moment you realize the people you sacrificed everything for were the ones holding the knife, you'll understand what I was about to do next. Because I wasn't just planning revenge. I was planning a lesson they would never forget. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? The plan began with paper. Not rage, not shouting. Paper. The quiet kind that looks harmless until it's stacked correctly. I sat at the dining table before sunrise, the house washed in a thin blue light. The jasmine on Margaret's robe still lingered in the air like an accusation, and somewhere down the hall the grandfather clock cleared its throat and kept time for me. Tick, tock, proof, then power. I pulled the manila folders toward me. Insurance, titles, tax returns, years of my life alphabetized, every sacrifice with a receipt. The leather of my father's chair creaked when I leaned back, his pocket watch warm in my palm. I flipped it open. The second hand swept forward with a crisp, surgical certainty. Time wasn't healing me. Time was sharpening me. I started with the bank. New accounts, private, sealed, the kind you don't stumble into. I moved what was mine to a place only I could see. The old joint card stayed active on purpose, a small stage where actors reveal themselves when they think the audience is asleep. I set low alerts, a text for every luxury purchase, every midnight transfer. If they wanted to write their confession in numbers, I would frame it. By noon, I had appointments, back to back, like girders in a rising frame. A family attorney at 2, a real estate lawyer at 3:30, my accountant at 5. I shaved close, put on the charcoal jacket Margaret always said, made me look respectable, and walked into each office like a contractor with a deadline. I want a living trust that keeps the house in my name, and out of anyone's hands but mine, I told the attorney. And I want a medical directive that leaves no room for misunderstandings. He looked up over his glasses. You expecting a fight? I smiled without humor. I'm expecting efficiency. At the real estate office, I signed what needed signing and rescinded what needed rescinding. No co-signers, no one on title, no casual permissions written on the back of love and habit. When I reached the accountant, I laid out my ledgers. Assume every line will be read by someone who wants to hurt me, I said. Make it boring. Make it clean. By evening, the house smelled like printer ink and lemon polish. I wiped the table until the grain lifted under my fingertips, a small domestic mercy. When the front door opened, Margaret floated in under the porch light, grocery bags in hand, eyes bright with practiced softness. You're home early, she said, like an actress reciting a line she didn't believe. Inspection got canceled. I lied easily and took a bag from her. Cold condensation kissed my knuckles through the thin paper. How was your day? She smiled too quickly. Busy. A hint of cologne ghosted past her. His eye. I filed the detail with the others. She kissed my cheek, and the smell of jasmine folded over the steel in my chest. I set the bag down carefully. In the quiet hour after dinner, I placed two things in the open where they couldn't be ignored: a manila folder labeled Estate Updates on my desk, and my father's pocket watch on the mantel, polished until its face caught the light. One was bait, the other was a reminder to me, to anyone paying attention, that time belonged to the man who respected it. The folder was theater. Inside, innocuous forms sat on top: old appraisals, insurance summaries, a printed email about refinancing. Beneath them, I slipped 3 pages that said nothing and everything: a blank power of attorney template, an article about protecting elderly spouses, and a note I wrote to myself in black letters. Sign nothing without counsel. It wasn't for me, it was a mirror, tilted toward anyone nosy enough to look. I let the house carry my silence to them. The living room lamp hummed. Outside, rain started, a fine needle threading against the windows. When the doorbell finally rang, I didn't need to check the peephole. I knew that rhythm. My brother Caleb never learned subtlety. He knocked like he expected Wood to apologize. "Busy?" he asked, stepping in before I finished opening the door. He wore my kindness like a coat that didn't fit. Expensive now, but still tugging at the seams. His cologne, brash, eager, chased the rain into the hallway. "Always," I said, hanging his jacket like I still believed in weather and manners. We talked in the kitchen where the light was clean and the tile held sound. He leaned against the counter and spun a story about a short-term opportunity. Fast returns, no risk. The kind of lie that comes prepackaged with smile lines. I poured coffee and said little, letting the steam do the talking. Then I watched it happen. His eyes drifted past me, hooked on the manila folder on my desk. The flicker in his gaze was small, but it was there, the hungry little candle that lives in a man who mistakes taking for talent. "What's that?" he asked, pretending not to ask. "Estate updates," I said, stirring my coffee. The spoon clinked against the mug like a metronome. "House insurance. Boring stuff." He grinned, friendly prying. "Want me to look it over? You know I'm good with paperwork." "You're good at reading what doesn't belong to you," I thought. Aloud I said, "Maybe later." We moved to the living room. Caleb sank into my father's chair without asking. The one line he never stopped crossing. And I took the sofa, hands folded, the pocket watch bright on the mantel between us. The clock in the hallway stitched seconds into something taut. Caleb talked. I nodded. He circled. I let him. The house listened. When he left, the rain had strengthened into a soft, relentless curtain. I walked to the desk. The folder had shifted less than an inch. Only a fidget could measure it, but the top sheets were no longer perfectly square. He'd peeked. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to be himself. I smiled then. A small, private thing. Because paper isn't just paper when it's placed where a thief can see himself. It's a blueprint, a trapline, a countdown. What I didn't know yet, what neither of them knew, was how quickly that countdown would accelerate once I touched the one thing they thought they controlled. The story of who I was and what I would tolerate. And that wasn't all. Evidence doesn't just speak, it whispers first. You have to be patient enough to hear it. The morning after Caleb's friendly visit, I opened the desk drawer and pulled out an old digital recorder I hadn't touched since Brianna's high school graduation. Back then, I used it to save every speech, every memory. Now it would serve a different purpose. Truth caught in their own voices. I hid it in plain sight, tucked beneath the folded napkins on the dining room buffet. That was where Margaret always placed her glass of wine during late-night phone calls. And Margaret loved to talk when she thought I was asleep. Sure enough, that night, her voice drifted down the hallway, soft but poisoned with greed. "He's been moving things around, Caleb. Something about estate updates. We need him to sign before he changes too much." My brother's reply was lower, urgent. "Don't pressure him. Let him think it's his idea. Then we strike." The recorder blinked silently, swallowing their words whole. But words weren't enough. I needed paper too, the kind they thought was private. So I gave them temptation. On Sunday, I left my briefcase accidentally open in the living room, just as Margaret rushed out to meet Caleb for a so-called errand. Inside were fake financial summaries I'd drafted, exaggerated valuations, whispered mentions of offshore accounts, even a printed draft titled Potential Succession Plan. Nothing outright false, just suggestive enough to bait greedy eyes. By evening, I knew she'd peeked. The papers weren't aligned the way I left them. A crease that hadn't been there before bent the corner of page 3. The jasmine perfume on the leather briefcase handle was stronger than usual. She couldn't help herself. What she didn't know was that tucked into the lining of the case was a slim GPS tag, the kind contractors use to track equipment. It wasn't illegal, it was mine, my case, my property. And when she carried it out to Caleb's place 2 nights later, I knew exactly where it went. I parked down the street, engine off, the pocket watch ticking steadily in my hand. Through their lit windows, I saw them hunched over my documents. Caleb pointing, Margaret nodding. Predators studying bait they thought was prey. I didn't storm in. Not yet. Instead, I clicked the recorder on again and let the night air capture their plotting. Caleb's voice carried through the open window. If he signs, everything transfers clean. If not, we push harder. And Margaret's reply, low and venomous, he's too sentimental. He won't fight. He never has. They still believed in the old me. I drove home under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the windshield streaked with rain. On the mantel, my father's pocket watch gleamed in the lamplight. I wound it carefully, listening to its steady tick. Not just time, countdown. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns out too quickly. What I felt now was colder, sharper. The kind of focus I'd seen in blueprints before a skyscraper rose. Every line precise, every angle intentional. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and smoke from the fireplace. I sat in my father's chair, recorder on the table, briefcase at my feet, proof in my hands, patience in my veins. They thought they were building their victory, but I was building their ruin. And soon, I would let them walk straight into it. There's a moment when hesitation dies. For me, it came on a Tuesday morning, just before dawn. The house was silent, except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I sat at the dining table, the recorder and my brother's voice still echoing through its small speaker. If he signs, everything transfers clean. If not, we push harder. Push harder. Those words clung to me like smoke. I realized, with a chilling clarity, that if I gave them another chance, if I wavered even once, they would destroy me. They weren't just planning theft, they were planning my erasure. A slow burial, alive in paperwork and signatures I would never see coming. I opened the folder labeled E-State Updates. My handwriting stared back at me. Precise block letters. Sign nothing without counsel. A warning I had written for myself, but one I knew Margaret would interpret differently. She thought it was weakness, evidence of paranoia, maybe even decline, but it wasn't. It was a line in the sand. I slipped the recorder into my coat pocket, tucked the fake financials back into the briefcase, and reached for the pocket watch on the mantel. The weight of it steadied my shaking hands. I remembered my father's words again. Once you commit, Alan, you don't turn back. Half a bridge is no bridge at all. That was it. The bridge behind me was gone. At 9 a.m., I was in my lawyer's office. Papers signed, documents notarized, safeguards built like concrete walls around my estate. Every asset redirected, every contingency locked down. I left nothing exposed. If Margaret or Caleb so much as breathed on my accounts, alarms would sound in places they didn't even know existed. Are you sure about this? My attorney asked, his pen poised above one last form. Once this is filed, there's no reversing it. I met his gaze and nodded. I've never been more certain. When I walked back into the house that afternoon, Margaret was waiting. She leaned against the doorframe with that practiced smile, the one that used to warm me but now only chilled. Alan, we should talk about our future, she said sweetly, as if the word our hadn't already been poisoned. I smiled back, calm, unreadable. We will. Soon. But I knew. The decision was already made. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, no second chances. That night, I set the recorder on the table, pressed play, and listened again to their betrayal as I stared at the pocket watch ticking in my hand. Each second was a drumbeat, steady and merciless, marching me toward the only path left. I was past the point of no return. The man they thought they knew, the one who forgave, who sacrificed, who stayed blind, was gone. In his place stood someone patient, calculating, inevitable. And Margaret and Caleb had no idea that their end had already begun. Margaret thought she was clever. That was her first mistake. 3 days after I filed the documents, she came to me in the kitchen, voice honey-sweet, movements rehearsed like a stage actress. The late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, striping her face in gold and shadow. She placed her hand over mine as I stirred my coffee, her perfume clinging to the air like an accusation. Alan, she whispered, I've been thinking, maybe we should update our plans, together. Make sure everything's secure for both of us. She said it gently, with practiced sincerity, as if I hadn't heard her laughter in Caleb's living room, mocking me, calling me too trusting to suspect a thing. She thought I was still blind. I set the spoon down carefully. That sounds reasonable, I murmured, keeping my eyes soft, my smile small. The words tasted like ash, but I let her believe them. Her relief was instant. I saw her shoulders loosen, her lips curve. She leaned in, brushing a kiss against my cheek, the kind of intimacy she hadn't offered me in years. For the first time in decades, she thought she had me back under her control. That evening, she called Caleb. I heard her voice drifting from the study. He's softening. I think he's coming around. We just have to be patient. I almost laughed. Patience was my specialty. The next morning, Caleb showed up with a manila folder and a pen, his tie loosened for casual effect. He clapped me on the back like a brother, his cologne stinging the air. Just some standard forms, he said. Protecting assets. You know how it is. You wouldn't believe how complicated this stuff gets. Margaret hovered in the doorway, her eyes bright, lips tight in a smile that betrayed her hunger. She thought this was the moment, the culmination of their months of planning. I took the folder, flipped it open. Lines of legal jargon sprawled across the pages, carefully designed to funnel my life's work into their hands. Looks official, I said evenly. Caleb's eyes glinted. Exactly. Nothing you need to worry about. Just sign here, and everything's taken care of. I let the silence stretch. I could feel their anticipation thick in the room, their eagerness pressing against me like a storm. Finally, I reached for the pen. Margaret's breath caught. Caleb's grin widened. I placed the pen tip against the paper, and then paused. My gaze slid to the mantel, where the pocket watch gleamed in the light. Tick, tock, time, patience, power. Slowly, deliberately, I set the pen down. Not today, I said softly. Confusion flashed across Caleb's face. Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp with forced calm. Alan, darling, you can trust us. This is for your own good. I smiled faintly. Of course it is, and we'll get to it soon. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and stood. My hands were steady, my voice calm, but inside I was already savoring their growing desperation. Because they believed they still had a chance. They believed I was teetering, that with the right pressure I'd collapse into their trap. They didn't realize I was the one tightening the net, pulling the strings, orchestrating every false step they took. Their hope was aflame, and I was already holding the water. The twist came on a Thursday evening, when I thought I had every angle covered. I'd been careful, too careful maybe. Every false document placed, every conversation recorded, every move of theirs anticipated. But betrayal, I would soon learn, has layers you don't see until the knife's already pressing against your ribs. I walked into the study after dinner to find Margaret already there, the lamplight haloing her hair, her hands clasped around something small and metallic. At first, I thought it was the pen Caleb had left behind, but when she turned, I froze. It was the recorder. My recorder. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was the only sound, hammering at my nerves. Then Margaret smiled, a slow, cold curve of her lips. You've been listening, she said softly. Not a question, a verdict. I forced my face to remain neutral. Cleaning out old drawers. Must have left it there. She shook her head, almost pitying. Don't insult me, Alan. You think I didn't notice the way you've been watching? The way you've been preparing? Her eyes glinted as she ran her thumb over the device. You think you're the only one capable of strategy? My pulse quickened. For weeks I had believed I was orchestrating their downfall, pulling strings they didn't know existed. But now the strings were visible to both of us. What are you planning to do with that? I asked carefully. Margaret leaned back against the desk, casual, almost amused. That depends. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. See, Caleb thinks you're still in the dark. But me, she tapped the recorder against her palm. I know you better than he does. You don't forgive. You endure. And when you endure, you build something dangerous. She was right. And the fact that she knew it sent a chill down my spine. So what now? I asked, my voice low. She stepped closer, lowering her voice until her breath mingled with mine. Jasmine and venom. Now, Alan, we play a different game. I keep this little treasure. I hold it safe. And you? She smiled sweetly, like a wife reassuring her husband. You behave. You stop digging. You stop resisting. Or else Caleb finds out you've been one step ahead. The air between us thickened with unspoken truths. If Caleb discovered the recorder, he'd panic. He'd rush. He'd push their plan forward recklessly, and in that recklessness he might destroy me before I was ready. Margaret thought she had checkmate. She thought the recorder was leverage, the ace in her manicured hand. But what she didn't know was that it wasn't the only one. The device in her grip held hours of poison. Yes, but it wasn't the original. It was a copy, one of three. The real recordings were locked away in a safety deposit box downtown, filed neatly under my name. I let my expression falter, just enough for her to believe she'd won. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Good, she whispered, pocketing the recorder. I knew you'd see reason. That night, as she slipped into bed beside me, smug in her false victory, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. The weight of the pocket watch pressed against my chest where I held it under the blanket. She thought she'd cornered me, but all she'd done was tighten the noose around her own neck. Because when the time came, she wouldn't just fall. She'd fall believing she was safe. Have you ever watched someone smile at you, knowing that smile hides a knife? That was Margaret, lying beside me, steady breathing, pretending peace, but I knew every whisper, every touch, every word was part of a script written to destroy me. And here's the truth. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who know where your scars are, the ones you trusted to protect them. That's why it cuts so deep. But what Margaret and Caleb didn't understand is that scars don't just mark weakness, they forge armor. So let me ask you, if you had proof in your hands, if you knew the people closest to you were plotting your ruin, would you forgive them, or would you wait, patient as time itself, to strike when they least expected it? It happened at Brianna's birthday dinner. Margaret had insisted on hosting it at our house, a performance, a tableau of family unity. The dining room glowed under the chandelier she had chosen years ago, its crystal facets scattering light across polished silver and porcelain. Our daughter sat at the center, radiant, laughing at Caleb's jokes, unaware of the serpents coiled at either side of her. I played the part of dutiful husband, carving the roast, pouring wine, smiling at stories I'd heard a dozen times. Inside, though, every tick of the clock pressed harder against my chest. The recorder, the false documents, the safety nets. I had laid every brick of the trap. Tonight I would open the door and let them walk straight into it. Margaret leaned close, her perfume thick and cloying. Her voice a whisper meant only for me. After dinner, Alan, we'll go over the papers. Caleb says it won't take long. Her hand grazed mine, a gesture that might have fooled anyone else at the table. I met her eyes and nodded, calm, agreeable. The performance continued. But when dessert came, Brianna's favorite lemon cake, I set down my fork and cleared my throat. The table fell quiet, all eyes turning to me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. There's something I'd like to share, I began. Margaret stiffened. Caleb's smirk faltered. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small speaker on the table. Its black surface gleamed under the chandelier. With a single tap, Margaret's voice filled the room. He's too sentimental. He won't fight. He never has. Brianna's fork clattered against her plate. Her eyes darted from her mother to me, confusion giving way to horror. The recording continued. Caleb's voice now. If he signs, everything transfers clean. If not, we push harder. The air snapped like a live wire. Margaret lunged forward, her face pale, her voice trembling. Alan, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. But the speaker went on. God, the man actually believes I love him. Margaret's laugh, sharp and cruel, echoed through the room. Brianna's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at her mother. The woman who had raised her, who had promised her family was sacred. Caleb's face drained of color. Dad. Brianna's voice broke. What is this? What are you saying? I looked at her, steady, unflinching. I'm not saying anything. They are. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret tried again, her voice desperate now. It's not what it sounds like. Really? I cut her off, my hand resting on the pocket watch in my vest. Its steady ticking anchored me. Because it sounds like you've both been plotting to erase me, to strip away everything I've built for you, Margaret, for this family. Caleb pushed back his chair, blustering. You can't prove those recordings are real. This is slander. I turned my gaze to him, cold and unwavering. That's the beauty of it, Caleb. There's not just one recording, there are many, and they're not in this house. Margaret's face blanched. She knew. She knew. She knew. Brianna rose from the table, trembling. Her eyes moved between the three of us, her father, her mother, her husband, and in that moment, the perfect picture of family shattered like glass under a hammer. The room was no longer a celebration. It was a battlefield. And this was only the beginning. Brianna's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. Mom? Caleb, is this true? Margaret stammered, reaching out as if to calm her daughter. Sweetheart, listen to me. Your father is twisting things. He's not well. He's imagining conspiracies. But Brianna pulled back, her eyes wide with betrayal. I just heard your voice. Both of you. How could you? The chandelier light caught the tears streaking her face, each one a reflection of everything they had just lost. Caleb tried to recover, his lawyer's composure snapping into place. Recordings can be edited. Alan has a motive, resentment, paranoia. He wants to turn you against us. I leaned forward, resting both hands flat on the table. My voice was steady, low, the kind of tone that leaves no room for argument. Then perhaps the financial records will speak louder. The copies of emails, the bank transfers routed through Caleb's firm, all of which are safely stored away. Caleb's smirk collapsed. Margaret gasped softly, her mask crumbling. Brianna's voice rose, sharp as broken glass. You were going to steal from him? From us? After everything Dad gave you? Margaret's lips quivered. She tried to reach for her daughter again, but Brianna stepped back as if the touch would burn her. The silence cracked, replaced by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each second hammering like judgment. I stood slowly, the weight of my father's pocket watch heavy in my palm. You both thought I wasn't watching, that I'd roll over, sign away my life, and disappear quietly. But you forgot one thing. The room held its breath. I was in the room the night you laughed at me, and I never left. The words hit like a verdict. Margaret collapsed into her chair, her hands covering her face. Caleb opened his mouth, but nothing came out, just the sputter of a man stripped bare in front of his audience. Brianna looked at me, her face pale but resolute. Dad, I'm so sorry. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her. None of this is your fault. The dinner table, once a symbol of family, now looked like a crime scene. Half-eaten cake, polished silver, and the ashes of trust scattered between us. Finally, I straightened, sliding the pocket watch back into my vest. This ends tonight. The lawyers will handle the rest. And if either of you think of coming near me or this family again, remember, I tapped the recorder, still glowing faintly on the table. Your voices will follow you wherever you go. The chandelier's light flickered, as if the house itself exhaled. Margaret sobbed quietly. Caleb stared at the floor, and Brianna clung to me, trembling. The battle was finished. The war was decided. But the reckoning had only just begun. The days that followed were strangely quiet. After the dinner, Margaret moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding my eyes, her perfume fading from the rooms she once ruled. Caleb vanished. His calls went unanswered. His visits stopped. By Monday, the lawyer confirmed what I already knew. Margaret had tried to withdraw funds from an account that no longer bore her name. The system flagged it immediately, freezing her access. Her voice cracked on the phone that evening, begging the banker for a reversal. I listened from the hallway as she pleaded, her tone shrinking with each denial. The woman who once dripped with authority now sounded small, desperate, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel pity. I felt release. Brianna stayed with me for a few days, her presence a bittersweet balm. She moved softly through the house, cleaning up the remnants of the disastrous dinner, quietly crying when she thought I couldn't hear. One night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once signed away countless sacrifices for her mother. Dad, she whispered, her hands clutching a mug of untouched tea. I don't understand how she could do this, how they could do this. I reached across, covering her trembling fingers with my own. Because greed blinds people, sweetheart. It makes them forget what matters. But you remember. Her tears spilled, but she nodded, and in that nod I saw hope, a seed of something better than the ruin Margaret and Caleb had left behind. Within weeks, the legal machinery turned. The estate was secure, my accounts untouchable. Caleb's firm was under review. His fingerprints were all over shady transfers and falsified statements. He had gambled with the wrong man's life, and the fallout was inevitable. Margaret tried to play the victim, of course. She called relatives, friends, spinning tales of paranoia and manipulation. But voices travel, and the voices I had captured, their laughter, their venom, spoke louder than any story she could invent. One by one, doors closed to her. Invitations stopped. Sympathy dried up. I saw her once, weeks later, in the grocery store. She stood in the aisle, hair unkempt, makeup absent, clutching a basket with trembling hands. For a moment our eyes met. She looked away first. I left without a word. At home, the silence no longer felt oppressive. It felt earned. I polished my father's pocket watch and set it on the mantel, where its tick carried through the house like a steady heartbeat. Not a countdown anymore, but a rhythm of survival, of renewal. The leather armchair creaked as I sat down. The same chair where I had once felt the crushing weight of betrayal. Now it felt different, lighter, almost like an embrace. I thought of the man I had been weary, blind, forgiving. That man was gone. In his place stood someone tempered by fire, someone who had seen the worst in those closest to him and chosen not to break. Justice hadn't come with shouting or fists. It had come with patience, with truth, with the simple act of refusing to be erased. And as I watched the evening light filter through the curtains, painting the room in gold, I realized something profound. They had tried to strip me of everything. Instead, they had given me back myself. The seasons shifted quietly, almost mercifully, as if the world itself wanted to help me start again. By the time spring arrived, the house no longer felt haunted. The scent of jasmine had faded, replaced by fresh paint, and the faint aroma of pine cleaner. The garden Margaret once neglected now bloomed with tulips and daffodils I planted myself, my hands digging into the soil like I was reclaiming more than just earth. I was reclaiming time. Brianna visited often. At first she carried guilt like a weight on her shoulders, convinced she had failed me by not seeing what her mother and uncle had done. But I reminded her, again and again, betrayal belongs to the betrayer. You owe me nothing but your honesty, I told her one evening as we sat on the porch, listening to the cicadas sing. That's more than I ever got from them. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in years I felt the warmth of family without pretense, without poison. Margaret had moved out completely by summer. Word traveled fast. She was living in a cramped apartment on the other side of town. Her once proud social circle evaporated. I didn't seek updates, but whispers found me anyway. Her credit drained, her reputation scorched, her new life a mirror of the ruin she had tried to script for me. Caleb, too, faced his reckoning. His firm collapsed under the weight of investigations. His name plastered across headlines he could not spin into gold. When he finally called, his voice hoarse, stripped of arrogance, I let it go to voicemail. He left no message. And me, I built. Not skyscrapers, not fortunes, not empires. I built mornings that began with coffee on the porch instead of dread. I built evenings filled with the steady rhythm of my father's pocket watch, ticking like a metronome of resilience. I built trust again, carefully, like stacking stones into a wall that would not crumble. One Saturday, Brianna brought her children to visit, my grandchildren. They ran through the hallways, laughter ringing against the walls that once echoed with lies. The youngest, a boy with eyes too wise for his years, found the pocket watch on the mantel. He held it carefully, listening to the tick. "What is it, Grandpa?" he asked. "A reminder," I said softly, taking it back into my hand. "That time belongs to those who respect it, and that patience is stronger than betrayal." His little brow furrowed, but he nodded as if he understood more than he could say. That night, after they left, I sat in the leather armchair once more. The same chair where I had sunk in despair, where I had nearly drowned in doubt. Now it felt like a throne, not of power, but of survival. I realized something as the dusk settled into night. Vengeance hadn't consumed me. It had freed me, because vengeance done right isn't about destruction, it's about balance. It's about showing those who tried to erase you that you still exist, stronger and sharper than before. I wasn't the same man who had stood trembling in the wardrobe, listening to his wife and brother plot in the dark. That man had died the moment I heard their laughter. The man who remained was tempered, scarred, but unbreakable. And as the pocket watch ticked on, marking the steady passage of time, I understood that justice had already been served. Not in a courtroom, not in a fight, but in the quiet collapse of those who thought they were untouchable. I closed my eyes and let the silence of my home wash over me. Not empty, not lonely, peaceful. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing for disappointment or betrayal or another sacrifice demanded in the name of love. For the first time, I was simply living. Betrayal doesn't end the moment it's exposed. It lingers, a shadow that follows you until you decide to step into the light. For me, that light was truth. The moment I stopped being blind, the moment I chose patience over panic, strength over silence, that was when I won. Margaret and Caleb thought they broke me, but in reality they forged me into something they could never control. And here's what I've learned. Scars don't define you, they refine you. The people who betray you become their own punishment, while you rise stronger than they ever imagined. So tell me, Have you ever faced betrayal so deep it changed who you are? If you were standing in my shoes, holding the proof, holding the power, would you walk away? Or would you wait, watch, and take your revenge?